Okay, so you guys have sent us some really interesting stuff about last mile delivery transportation.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it's clear that a lot is happening in this market
Oh, yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. And what we want to do today is like try to, go through all this information that you've given us and pull out like the really crucial insights. So
Right.
it's like you get a clear expert view, into this rapidly changing landscape.
Totally. It's like sort of an expert curated summary just for you.
Exactly, just for you.
Yeah. So you've given us a great, just a fantastic range of data. And what we're really trying to do is like, synthesize it down to what really matters.
Okay.
So you walk away understanding like, okay, what's the market size? What's it going to look like in the future?
Right.
And, what are the main factors driving this whole thing?
Okay, so let's dive right in then.
Okay.
I think the numbers are pretty significant right off the bat.
Yeah, they are.
The global last mile delivery transportation market is projected to be a massive 133,524.5 million US dollars in 2025.
Yeah.
That's a huge foundation to build on.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is the momentum.
Yeah.
By 2033, the market is expected to nearly double,
Wow.
reaching 266,055.93 million US dollars.
Wow.
So, that works out to a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of 9% from 2025.
Okay.
So think about it like this, like, if your savings account was growing at 9% a year,
Oh, yeah.
that's serious. That's serious expansion, right?
It puts it in perspective for sure.
Yeah.
So what's the engine driving this kind of growth? I mean, it seems like, a big part of this is coming from us, the consumers, right?
Sure.
We're expecting our deliveries to be faster.
Yeah.
And that includes, even same-day delivery in some cases.
Yeah, definitely. And rising consumer expectations aren't just a little thing. It's a primary driver.
Okay.
And think about it, when you go online, you buy something, it's great to be able to click buy, but the thing that really makes it work
It's showing up.
is the fact that it actually gets to your doorstep.
Right. And quickly.
Reliably and quickly.
Yeah.
And so, that's really the experience that people want, and that's what's going to keep them coming back for more.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's look at this kind of geographically because, I mean, it's not the same picture everywhere, right?
Absolutely. So if we kind of connect this to the wider world,
Okay.
we see some different regional dynamics.
Yeah.
North America is currently the biggest market. It's over 40% of the global revenue in 2025.
Wow.
With the size of 53,409.8 million US dollars. And it's still growing at a healthy pace.
Yeah.
A TGR of 7.2%
Yeah.
between 2025 and 2033.
So within North America, obviously the U.S. is the dominant player.
Yeah. First,
Projected at 42,140.33 million US dollars in 2025 with a 7% KGR.
Yeah.
But it's not just the US story. Canada's looking at a market of 6,409.18 million with a slightly stronger growth rate of 8%, and Mexico also is significant with 4,860.29 million.
Right.
And a projected KGR of 7.7%.
Yeah, so really healthy and still expanding.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll start seeing more, like even more specialized delivery services popping up.
Oh, for sure.
To kind of meet these demands.
Yeah, definitely niche services and specific things,
Right.
Catering to certain types of goods.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about Europe then?
So Europe is the second largest market,
Yeah.
and it's got over 30% of global revenue,
Okay.
with a size of 40,057.35 million US dollars in 2025.
Wow.
And so it's a little bit more moderate than North America in terms of its growth.
Okay.
We're looking at around 7.5% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
Okay.
But it's still a huge market with a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting in Europe is the variety.
Okay. So even within Europe, there's different growth stories happening.
For sure. Yeah.
The UK, for example, is looking at a KGR of 8.3%.
Okay.
With a market size of 6,729.3 million in 2025.
Got it.
Germany, major economic hub.
Yeah.
A larger market at 7,931.36 million.
Right.
But a slightly lower growth rate of 7.7%.
Yeah.
And then you've got, a significant market like Russia with 6,208.89 million.
Right.
But a much more modest growth rate of 6.5% projected.
Yeah. So different economic conditions, different, e-commerce adoption rates
Yeah.
playing out in different parts of Europe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then what about Asia Pacific? I feel like this is where there's a lot of potential for growth.
Yeah, Asia Pacific is the one with probably the most dynamic growth potential.
Okay.
Um, it currently has about 23% of the global market share
Okay.
with 30,764 million US dollars
Yeah.
in 2025.
Right.
But it's a projected CAGR of 11% from
Wow.
2025 to 2033
Mm.
is the highest we see globally.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference.
Yeah, that's a big jump.
Yeah.
And so in Asia Pacific, China, obviously a massive player,
Huge, yeah.
with a market size of 13,819.79 million in 2025
Yeah.
and a projected CAGR of 10.5%. But then, what's really interesting is India
Right.
showing an even faster growth rate of 12.8%
Yeah.
with a 2025 market size of 3,685.28 million. So that really shows you where the future, the energy is in this sector.
Yeah. It makes you think about the infrastructure. Like, how is the infrastructure going to support that kind of growth?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sheer volume of e-commerce that's happening in those markets,
Right.
combined with, the rapidly improving logistics infrastructure,
Yeah.
and a growing middle class, with more money to spend.
Right.
That's a really powerful combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about the other regions then? Latin America and the Middle East and Africa?
Yeah, so Latin America is, over 5% of the global share.
Okay.
A market size of 6,606.3 million US dollars in 2025.
Okay.
And a projected CAGR of 8.4%.
And within that, Brazil, with 2,857.4, 2 million and a 9% CAGR, and Argentina with 1,121.6, 1 million and a 9.3% CAGR are the ones to watch.
Okay.
And the Middle East and Africa is much smaller. It's about 2% of the share.
Okay.
With 2,670.49 million US dollars in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also showing some good momentum with an 8.7% projected CAGR.
Okay.
The GCC countries with a 9.5% CAGR and a market size of 1,142.97 million.
Okay.
And South Africa at 9.7% CAGR and 421.94 million are the ones to look at there.
Okay, so we're seeing a real mix of current market size and then future growth potential.
Yeah, for sure.
Across all these different regions. So we talked about, consumer expectations driving this, but what are some of the other forces behind these impressive numbers?
Yeah, so there are a few things that are kind of all working together.
Okay.
First and foremost is just the continued growth of e-commerce, right?
Of course, yeah.
And as more people around the world are shopping online for more things,
right.
The need for efficient and reliable last-mile delivery is just becoming absolutely essential.
Yeah.
It's just a direct consequence of how we're choosing to shop.
Right. And it's not just the volume of purchases, it's also the type of goods.
Absolutely.
I mean, online grocery orders, for example, that puts a whole new level of pressure on things, right?
On things like cold chain logistics.
Yeah.
Making sure things stay fresh.
Right.
And needing those deliveries to be faster and more frequent.
Yeah, you can't wait 3 days for your, produce to show up.
Exactly, yeah.
So what else is fueling this expansion?
So secondly, we have technology and it's just constantly advancing, right? So you've got sophisticated GPS tracking systems, intelligent route optimization software, that delivery companies are using.
Right.
And these tools are making deliveries so much more efficient and faster.
So it's not just about the drones, it's about the software that's kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally. It's the stuff that we don't see that's making the whole system smarter.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then thirdly, we're seeing a big increase in the use of electric and autonomous vehicles.
Okay.
And this is partly because of sustainability.
Of course.
People are more concerned about the environment.
Yeah.
Businesses want to reduce their impact. But it's also about cost savings.
Right.
EVs have lower fuel and maintenance costs.
Right.
And autonomous vehicles could mean lower labor costs.
Right. Fewer drivers.
Yeah, exactly. And they can potentially operate 24/7.
Yeah, it's interesting how those two things are kind of, coming together.
Absolutely, yeah.
To kind of push things forward.
Yeah.
Now, with all this projected growth, are there any significant restraints?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are some hurdles.
Like,
One major one is just the high operational costs.
Okay.
I mean, last mile delivery is expensive.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got fuel costs, labor costs,
Mm.
vehicle maintenance infrastructure, all of
All
that.
right.
And that can really eat into profit margins,
Of
and it
course.
can limit how quickly some companies can expand or innovate.
So it's forcing companies to innovate in other ways
Yeah.
to kind of deal with these costs.
Yeah. So we're seeing things like micro-fulfillment centers popping up.
What's that?
So these are like mini warehouses located within cities.
Okay.
So the idea is to get the goods closer to the customers,
I see.
reduce the distance of each delivery.
Right.
And that could really change how urban warehousing works in the future.
That's fascinating
Yeah.
how this challenge is actually leading to some,
Absolutely.
new interesting ways to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So what other challenges are there?
Um, Another big one is traffic,
Of course.
congestion, and, just the complexity of cities.
Yeah.
I mean, as more people move into urban areas and there are more cars on the road,
Right.
it just gets harder and harder for delivery vehicles to get around efficiently.
Yeah. Finding parking, dealing with road closures. I mean,
That's-
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a logistical nightmare, and it slows down deliveries. It drives up costs.
Yeah, it's a problem.
It's a problem for sure.
So let's talk about some of the trends that are emerging in the market.
Okay.
We've already touched on EVs and autonomous vehicles, but are those also key trends that we're seeing play out?
Yeah, they're definitely central to what's happening.
Okay.
I mean, the rise of electric vehicles in last mile delivery is not just a future thing. It's happening now.
Right.
And it's accelerating
Why?
because you've got pressure from consumers who want sustainable options.
Right.
And you've got pressure from governments and regulators who want to see lower emissions.
Yeah.
So it's making EVs a really attractive choice for
Right.
delivery companies.
And what about the increasing use of autonomous delivery?
Yeah, so that's another huge trend.
Okay.
And while we're not quite at the point where it's everywhere,
Right.
we're seeing rapid progress, both in drone technology
Okay.
and in ground-based autonomous robots.
Like little robots driving around.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
little delivery robots. And these technologies have the potential to really boost efficiency,
Right.
cut down delivery times,
Yeah.
and ultimately reduce costs.
It's crazy to think about like robots delivering groceries.
I know it's like something out of a movie,
Yeah.
but it's becoming real.
Yeah. So let's kind of dig into some specific segments of the market. Let's
Yeah.
start with vehicle type. What's the breakdown there?
Yeah, so when we look at the types of vehicles being used,
Okay.
light-duty vehicles,
Mhm.
your vans and smaller trucks,
Right. The class.
the classic delivery van.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are expected to continue to be the most common type of vehicle for last-mile delivery,
Okay.
for the foreseeable future anyway.
Why is that?
Well, they're relatively inexpensive. They're versatile.
Mhm.
They can navigate city streets pretty well,
Right.
and they're just a practical choice.
Okay. So despite all the buzz about, new technologies,
Yeah,
the good old delivery van's not going anywhere.
not anytime soon, no.
Okay. But what about those newer vehicle types?
Yeah, so while light-duty vehicles will probably still be the most numerous,
Okay.
um, the drone segment is projected to be the fastest growing
Okay.
in terms of adoption rate.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's because they can avoid traffic,
Right. Fly over.
fly right over it.
Yeah.
They can deliver small packages really quickly,
Right.
and potentially they can cut down on operational costs
Okay.
for some types of deliveries.
So they're not going to replace the delivery van entirely?
No, probably not,
They're going to...
but they're going to have their place.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and things like, battery life, payload capacity regulations,
Right. Of course.
those are going to be really important in determining how quickly they get adopted.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. Let's move on to another segment then, component.
Okay.
What are the kind of key components that make up this market?
Yeah, so you can basically divide the market into two main components.
Okay.
Solutions and services.
Okay.
And right now, solutions have the bigger share.
Okay.
And this includes all the tech platforms that make modern logistics work.
Okay.
So things like route planning software, real-time tracking systems, warehouse management tools.
So the digital infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. It's all the stuff that's happening in the background
Right.
to make the whole system run smoothly.
Right. Okay. And what about services then?
So services are growing rapidly.
Why?
And this is because businesses want more specialized and flexible delivery options.
Okay.
Customers are demanding faster, more convenient, more personalized delivery experiences.
Right.
So the need for things like same-day delivery, temperature-controlled transport, white glove service, reverse logistics, All of that is growing.
It's not enough to just drop a package at the door anymore.
No, not anymore.
Yeah, so let's think about the end users then.
Okay.
Who are the actual customers driving this demand?
So the biggest segment right now is FMCG delivery,
Okay. What is that?
fast-moving consumer goods.
Okay.
So this is things like groceries, household products, personal care items.
Okay, the stuff that we buy all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, the everyday essentials.
Okay. And why is that the biggest segment?
Well, because people buy these things frequently,
Right.
and they often need them quickly.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot of volume there.
Okay, so what are some of the other significant end users then?
Um, so beyond FMCG, we've got food delivery, which has obviously exploded in recent years.
Oh, yeah.
Health products delivery is another big one,
Okay.
driven by convenience and sometimes, the need to get medication quickly.
Right.
And then you've got postal services, adapting to the e-commerce boom,
Right.
and then deliveries of things like car parts, electronics, clothes, and just a whole range of other e-commerce products.
So lots of different stuff moving around.
It's a huge variety.
Okay, so let's talk about what's actually powering these delivery vehicles.
Okay.
The different propulsion methods.
Right.
What's dominant now and what's the forecast?
So right now, electric vehicles have the biggest share
Okay.
when it comes to propulsion.
So electric is leading?
Yeah, and this is mainly because of their environmental benefits,
Right.
and also they're cheaper to operate,
All right.
in terms of fuel and maintenance.
Okay.
And there's this big push for sustainable logistics,
Yeah,
especially in cities where air pollution is a problem.
of course.
So they're becoming the preferred option.
Okay, but is that the whole picture?
Well, interestingly, ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles,
Okay.
are actually projected to be the fastest growing segment in the coming years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which might seem a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, I would think electric is just going to
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
take over.
Yeah, but it's probably because the infrastructure for ICE vehicles is already so well established.
That's true.
They can go further on a single tank
Yeah.
compared to most EVs,
That's fair.
and they can be cheaper to buy up front.
Okay.
So in areas where there aren't that many charging stations
Right.
or where delivery routes are really long,
Right.
ICE vehicles are still going to be a popular choice.
Okay, so electric is leading now, but, traditional engines are
They're not going away.
not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the type of cargo being transported.
Okay.
What kind of goods dominate this last mile?
So right now, perishable goods have the largest share.
Okay,
And that's because, they need to be delivered quickly
of course, yeah.
and they need to be kept at the right temperature.
Of course, yeah.
So think about fresh food, pharmaceuticals, flowers, all that stuff.
They can't sit around in a warehouse
Exactly.
for days and days.
Exactly. So speed and careful handling are really important.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about the other major category of goods then?
So non-perishable goods are projected to be the fastest growing segment.
Okay,
And that's because of the huge growth in e-commerce,
right.
for things like electronics, clothing, packaged foods.
Right, the stuff that basically everyone buys online now.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
These items generally last longer
Right,
and they're not as sensitive to delays.
right.
So they're really driving the increase in volume that we're seeing in last mile logistics.
So perishables need the speed now,
Yeah.
but non-perishables are really
That would be
good.
the big growth area.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, finally, let's look at who actually owns and operates these last mile delivery services.
Okay.
The different ownership models.
So the dominant model right now is third-party logistics,
Okay.
or 3PL.
What's that?
So these are companies that specialize in logistics.
Okay.
Things like warehousing and last mile delivery.
Okay.
And a lot of businesses partner with 3PLs
Right.
because they have the expertise, the technology, the scale.
Yeah, it makes sense to outsource that
Exactly.
to someone who knows what they're doing.
Totally. Yeah. So it allows those businesses to focus on what they do best,
Right.
rather than trying to manage their own delivery operations.
So like a small online retailer who doesn't want to
Exactly.
lift up their own.
Exactly. They'd probably go with a 3PL.
Got it. Okay, so a lot of companies are outsourcing this critical part of their business.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, what about the trend in terms of ownership growth then?
So fourth-party logistics, 4PL,
Okay.
is projected to be the fastest growing goal.
What's the difference?
So 4PL providers are kind of like the next level up from 3PLs.
Okay.
They don't just handle the logistics, they actually manage the whole supply chain
Wow.
from start to finish,
Okay.
often using multiple 3PLs.
Okay.
They're all about optimizing the entire process
Okay.
using data and technology.
So they're like supply chain orchestrators.
Exactly. Yeah, they're looking at the big picture.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What about some of the other ownership models?
So you've also got in-house logistics,
Oh,
where companies have their own delivery fleets.
okay.
Second-party logistics, 2PL,
Okay.
which is usually when companies use their own trucks or vans
Okay.
for specific parts of their supply chain.
Okay.
And then there's fifth-party logistics, 5PL.
Okay, this is getting complicated.
I know it's a lot of PLs, right?
Yeah.
But 5PL is kind of a newer concept,
Okay.
and it's about aggregating and managing logistics services
Okay.
across multiple 3PLs and 4PLs,
Okay.
often using e-commerce platforms and advanced technology.
So it's like a super integrated system.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about creating these highly optimized supply chains.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways that companies are approaching their logistics needs.
It's a complex landscape.
It is.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
Let's try to summarize some of the key takeaways before
Okay.
we wrap up.
Sounds good.
I mean, this market is on a huge growth trajectory.
Oh, yeah, it is.
It's fueled by e-commerce and by, consumers wanting faster delivery. Absolutely.
North America is the biggest player now,
Yeah.
but Asia Pacific is the one to watch
It is for sure.
in the coming years.
Yeah.
And we've explored, the drivers, the shift to online shopping, the technology, the need for sustainability.
Right.
We talked about the challenges, the high costs, the complex logistics of cities, and we looked at some of the key trends, electric vehicles, autonomous delivery,
Right.
all shaping the future of how we get our stuff.
Totally. Yeah. And understanding all of this gives us a really valuable insight, not just into the logistics industry,
Right.
but into how commerce is evolving in general.
Yeah, how we buy things and how we get them.
Exactly how we interact with the whole process.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a final thought to
Mhm.
leave you with. I
Okay.
think if you look at everything we've talked about, the different vehicles, the propulsion methods, the ownership models,
Yeah.
which single segment do you think has the most potential to really shake things up?
Ooh, that's a good question. And why do you think that, think about how these trends might affect your own delivery experiences or even the wider economy?
Yeah, that's a great point.
So hopefully this is giving you a good foundation for kind of exploring this market,
Definitely.
which is super dynamic and changing really quickly all the time.
Yeah, for sure.